Good, good day, everyone. My name is Kendi Gunyali, and welcome to Data Fight Academy Training. I want to believe everyone can hear me clearly. You can unmute yourself so that we know that we are audible enough, and we can begin uh, the training. Uh, I know I'm seeing a lot of people, and I know there's still a lot of people that are trying to join, but please kindly just one or two person can unmute yourself so that we are sure that you can hear us properly. And we already have our speakers in the house, and we can go ahead to start. Okay. So I'm seeing a finger.
We can hear you.
All right, that's very good. Thank you very much. My name is Kendi Obiali, and
We can hear you.
thank you very much. Thank you. Aha. So as I said, my name is Kendi Obiali, and I am a data analyst and journalist and an academic trainer with Data Fights. And I want to use this opportunity to welcome you all to Data Fight Academy training, where the essence of this training is to incorporate the ideology or expand the ideology behind data journalism in our day-to-day reporting. We are hoping that there are a lot of journalists, at least from our forms that we registered, we saw over 80% of journalists registered. And we know that the challenge of journalists most likely is even related to data, right? And one of the idea that brought about this training is to see how we can um, uh, incorporate the practice of data journalism in our day-to-day reporting processes, either be it print, online, broadcasting, so on and so forth. So one of what we want to do here is to talk about reports, right? Especially reports that we have seen from different authors that stood out, especially that are data researched and data driven. And we asked them to talk about it, to walk us through the process of how they came about sourcing, gathering data, analyzing it to make those reports stand out. I might even tell you at this point that if some of these reports have been nominated for awards, right? So we want to get in to speak with those people, right, who have authored those reports and see if they can walk us through the process, which might probably inform how we see reporting in coming year, 2025 and beyond, right? So once again, I want to welcome you all to this training, and I hope that this will have much lasting impact on you. Now, might I say too at this point too that this is the first leg of the training, right? The training is supposed to start. This is the first phase, so there's still going to be two other phases that's going to happen in 2 weekends, most likely in January. So we're just going to bring about 3 speakers today, and we hope that by January we're going to do a second phase or a second leg of this training. Then we bring other speakers. So if you think that we're doing this to make sure that each aspect of reporting or each aspect of journalism is touched, right? So much that we can touch reports around conflicts, we can touch reports around human rights, we can touch reports around gender, we can touch reports around climate change, we can touch reports, a lot of it. So as much as different aspect of journalism is concerned, we want to see how data can be used to resource some of these aspect of journalism that some of us has created to become niche bit. Depends on where we're working with or who we're working with in our respective sectors of practice, right? So I want to welcome you. In the next 1 or 2 minutes, I'm going to be walking us through, for some of us that are probably not familiar with data fights, I'm going to be walking us through what we do in data fights. Then we're going to kickstart the training. So as you can see on your screen, Data Fight is a cutting-edge digital tech powerhouse providing data access, insights, and research for businesses, government, and developmental organization or development organization. What we also do is what we call niche journalism, right? Which is a platform driven by information literacy and insights using socioeconomic data, fact checking, and other solution journalism. And might I put here that other aspect of journalism also works in line with what we do, right? We also provide technology and training services to help institution public data. One of the arms at which this training right now we're organizing is Inch, right? In most likely the second or third phase of this training, we're going to be introducing to you some AI tools we believe we in DataFight has created that we believe would help journalists as they go forward. Some AI tools that we have also researched about that we believe that introduction of AI into the practice of journalism will help will help speed up the work in whatsoever we do, right? So most likely in the second phase of this training or third phase of this training, we're going to be introducing AI tools to you that you can work. And with my own study, I have seen over time that these AI tools are always beneficial for even broadcasters, right? That's not to say that we print guys don't also need AI tools, right? Beyond the ChatGPT and the likes, we also have some special AI tools that helps us to analyze data, that helps us to analyze documents. So please, I'm saying this so that we stay tuned. By January, when we're going to be sending out mails for you to attend the second or third training, please do well to stay tuned so that you're going to get familiar with some of these AI tools that we're going to be introducing to you, right? And one of the other things that we do is raising network of community agents to use data journalism for policy advocacy, right, and development. And some of these are tied to some of the works that we've done and some of the tools that we have also developed. So over time, in subsequent training, we're going to be introducing you to these AI tools, right? And I hope this is like the longest of all talks that I'm going to be doing on this training. So the rest is going to be questions. So for moderation, right, we want to ask that when the speakers come up and begin to narrate their story, as much as possible, they're going to be speaking for close to 20 minutes thereabout. Please try not to interrupt them. If you have a question, put it on the chat box. I'll try as much as possible to collate them. We're also going to have sections for question and answer after each of those training, after each of those presentations by the speakers, right? So you can also ask your question there. But if you think you will forget, you can try, help me, put it on the chat box, and I'm going to collect it. So I think this is the longest of all talk I'm going to do. Welcome once again to Data Fight Academy training. With that being said, one of the first speakers I would like to bring up, which I already know is available on this training, is Kunle Adebajo. I don't know if Kunle, if you can hear me clearly. Let me stop sharing my screen right now because I know you also want to share your screen. Mr. Kunle, if you can hear me clearly, you can unmute your mic.
So I should just go right ahead, yeah?
Okay, yeah, I was about to read your profile, but my screen is not coming up. So probably I'm going to do that after the training, but please, you can go ahead. Do I need to make you an host or a co-host on this training so that for you to share your slide, if you have any? I think I need to do that.
I'm seeing the option. I think I can do that already.
Okay. Let me know if you have done that. Then.
Yep. So, I mean, you don't have to introduce me. I can always introduce myself. My name is Kunle Adebajo, and I'm an Abuja-based journalist. I started my career at the International Center for Investigative Reporting, ICIR, as an investigative reporter. And then I moved to Human Angle in 2020, where I served as a senior investigative reporter and then finally as investigations editor until 2 months ago. At the moment, as the flyer for the event shows, I'm editor for the African Academy for Open Source Investigations at Code for Africa. where I mostly focus on forensic digital reporting, capacity building, information manipulation, and so on. Yes. So, I mean, I was informed that I'm supposed to do a story showcase, and that already made me really complacent. So I felt like I did not really have to prepare for this since I'm just talking about a story that I did. But as much as that's a good thing, it's also um, uh, temptingly counterproductive, right? Anyway, what I intend to do is to just talk about this one story that was published in October. Uh, I do not know if any of us has come across it. What I'm going to do is talk a bit about the story, like an overview, and then talk about the inspiration for the story, and then mention the various data points in the story, uh, and then talk about the methodology for gathering the data, talk about the visualization, and then just conclude the talk. So hopefully, if people have questions on areas that I may not touch on, then we can address that in the few minutes following my presentation. Now, I think this would fall under the human rights category that Kennedy talked about. Um, it's a story about the insurgency being waged by non-state actors, non-state armed groups in southeastern Nigeria. And what it aimed to do essentially is to um, bring out or highlight the connection between fundraising activities being organized by the independence movement, as well as increased insecurity and cases of um, murders, people being killed in the southeastern region, while also linking the group to violent rhetorics, um, and cases of disinformation campaigns. So so in this story you would find it's sort of a lengthy read. You would find um, different components that try to come together in a coherent manner. Now, the inspiration for this was really I've done some articles about IPOB in the past. I've looked at the Facebook groups that they have, or Facebook pages which are administered by people in the diaspora and which are spreading all sorts of disinformation on that platform. Cases of copy paste, coordinated inauthentic behavior and all that. I also did an article looking into the concept of the unknown gunmen, and my hypothesis then was that the unknown gunmen is essentially a cover or a disguise that is being used by IPOB insurgents to commit acts of terror without necessarily being held responsible or accountable for those acts of terrorism. Uh, and what I did with that was to try to draw that connection by analyzing data that I scraped from a lot of IPOB affiliated Facebook pages. So in doing, I came across some videos live streamed by the Simon Ekpa's faction of IPOB, where they raise money. So they live stream their Zoom meetings where people are uh, announcing that they are donating two and two amount to the cause. So now they call themselves the Biafra Republic Government in Exile, BRGIE, which is being led by Simon Ekpa, who's now been arrested in Finland. Now the inspiration for the story is basically me thinking, oh, if they are live streaming these fundraising meetings, that means there is a potential data story here. That means one could listen in on those meetings and gather data of how much is being pledged or how much has been raised by various members of the group or various allies or supporters of the group across the world. And so like I think in June, I started gathering that data. What I first did was to, okay, I think to be nice for me to also show a spreadsheet. So what I first did was to download as many of those videos as possible. I was planning to do a lot of them, but eventually I settled on about 6 videos or 6 meetings in 1 month. And that for me could then be used as representative data to reflect on how much they could gather maybe in a year or in a 6 month period. So I'm just going to let me stop sharing so I can share like an Excel sheet that shows the raw data. So now I'm going to share my entire screen. All right, so this is what it looks like. I started by just writing down highlights from the meetings and then taking the statistical note as well. So this was the June 30 meeting, the duration of the meeting, some of the things that they said. So as I was writing notes and stamping the quotes from those meetings, which would help with the qualitative storytelling, I was at the same time also taking quantitative data. So for the June 30 special meeting, this was how much people were donating, some individuals, these were the countries. And then I would, because they are from different countries, I would then do the USD conversion of the various currencies. And then the sum total. This was a special fundraising for the Finland convention that was supposed to take place this month. And for the June 29 regular fundraising meeting, I adopted the same methodology. Usually the country reps should announce the names of the individual donors and how much they donated. So on average, there were like hundreds of donors every blessed week. So I did that for six meetings in the month of June. And then I analyzed the information by comparing donations from different countries, comparing how many donors there were, the average amount of donation per donor, so you know which members are more generous or richer, and so on and so forth. I was also able to gather. So these are the links to the live stream videos. These were the ones that I analyzed, and I still have the download. So I have the downloads of these videos in case they are taken down, which is also important to archive whatever information that you're analyzing. This particular sheet is information that I scraped from their website about the members of the executive cabinet. So the same information too I scraped with respect to the liaison officers. So by doing this, it became easy for me to easily say, oh, they have this amount, this number of officers or this number of executive members in these different places. The tool I use for this is something called the Instant Data Scraper. You can easily download this from the Google Chrome extension store. So that was the data gathering process, essentially. I don't go click this team mistake. So now the different components of data in this story. Number one, the fundraising data that I mentioned. And a lot of the findings that I had were visualized using Flourish. This one is just to make the story look more interesting. telling you that this is the total number of amounts that was raised between that particular month. And then I was also able to project using that number. I was able to tell how many countries they were donating from within that period. And Flourish also allowed me to generate this table that you can search through. So if you enter Canada, for example, you will see all the data points from Canada. If you enter, say, South Africa, the same thing. So you can easily, at your fingertip, be able to estimate the amount of contributions that were received from the 43 or so countries. So what I did then was to now contextualize the number such that you have an idea of how much they will be able to generate within a year, which is an estimated amount of $1.3 million. So I then compared this to figures from Nigeria's budget, how much Nigeria was even budgeting for certain things that probably was not in more than or up to this amount. Patrol and operational vehicles, training for security personnel, and so on. I was also able to use Flourish to visualize the contributions from the different countries. The United States ranks the highest, followed by the United Kingdom, Italy, and so on. After the story was published, I got contacted by a diplomatic officer from one of the top ranking countries. And it's probably this visualization that helped them to be able to easily tell that, their country is a country of interest as far as this story is concerned. So Flourish Studio, I think Google bought them or so. So because now it's under a Google initiative, and a lot of their templates are free of charge. So you can use it for your stories, especially stories that have a lot of data involved. So they have a lot more options than, say, platforms like Data Wrapper, that allows you to be able to accurately represent your data in a way that is sort of tailor-made for that story, rather than you shoehorning it, so that just using available templates. These ones were just done using Canva. I guess it's not one of our concerns for this training. Now, yeah. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, I don't know if that was a mistake. Yes, so another data point that I used in this story was
for me, we should accept the blame because
okay. Oh yeah, of course, we can do that now.
Instead of them suspending, whichever we should the money goes to your account. So
is that fine? I just sent the URL in the chat box.
Yes, I think you can continue. I was about looking for that too. You can continue.
Okay. I actually intended to do that, but I forgot. So the second data point was the armed conflict location and event data, which is as far as I'm concerned, the most reliable source of data for political violence across the world. They've been gathering this data since the 1980s or so, and it's up to date. The only problem is now it is even more restricted, so you have to pay to access certain things, or you have to request to be given access to certain things. But I was still able to get data up until June 2024, as at the time the story was published. So I analyzed data on fatalities in all of Nigeria's geopolitical zones. Again, you'll find the raw data analysis was done. I used this spreadsheet for that. This was all the raw data from ArcLED, and this was the analysis using the various geopolitical zones and then I further analyzed using states in the southeast, um, according to incidents and fatalities between 2019 and 2024. So when you do this, you easily get a bird's eye picture of what's going on. You can easily check the trends across the years. You see whether something is getting worse. You see where the hotspots are. You see where the outliers are. I was also able to use the pivot table to get data about who most of the perpetrators were, or who most of the civilians were, or data about how many of those incidents were targeting civilians, incidents with civilian targeting, as you can see here. And this is really useful. So these are all spreadsheets for the various states. Um, so first I looked at the various geopolitical zones, and then I did a different chart for the 5 states in the southeastern region of Nigeria. So you can see that Anambra and Imo are the most affected, followed by Ebonyi. And you can also, with the way the chart is designed by Flourish, you can also deselect some of the years. So you see what the trend is in 2024, for example. You can see that Anambra is the worst affected state, followed by Ebonyi, followed by Imo State. But that was probably not the case back in 2023, when Imo was the second most affected. Um, so that's also the beauty of interactive charts. Of course, it's not all the time that you need to make your charts interactive, but there are some instances, especially when you have lots of data with lots of nuances, that this would just make it easier for people to have access to all the corners and contours of the data you've gathered. And this is where the data I was able to scrape using pivot table was useful, because I'm able to show how many of those UGM attacks were targeting civilians, or targeting police officers, targeting military agents, targeting vigilantes, and so on. So the final data point that I included in this story is from social media. And you can do this if you have access to Meltwater, but Meltwater is not every organization that has access to it. But then you can also collaborate with organizations with access. Uh, um, Call to Africa is actually the only organization I know, because it's one of the um, core things that they do. So they have to pay for certain tools and softwares. So if you reach out to somebody from Code for Africa, they should be able to help you, um, especially if you work for a partner organization. Now, but again, you can also use, somebody told me you can use Instant Data Scrapper to do this, but the last time I tried, it did not work. So it's possible that, Twitter has also updated their privacy such that, or data restrictions such that you won't be able to get those things. Anyway, so what I was able to achieve with this, I scraped all the tweets from Simon Ekpa in 2024, and I could use that information to see what percentage of all the tweets that he has posted was posted this year. So you can tell that if he's been on the platform since 2015, and about a third of his tweets were posted in 2024 alone, then it means that his level of activity on the platform has increased because of the advocacy and the agenda that he's pushing for the Biafran liberation movement. And I was also able to use this information to see how much of the times he tweeted, he used the word terrorist, which in most cases it was in reference to Nigeria security forces. So that also helps to cement the theory that it was, declaring a war against the Nigerian government, which he constantly refers to as like a terrorist organization and so on. Now, in talking about this, I talked about the methodology as well as the visualization. So it means um, I'm, I'm essentially done with this presentation. But the last thing that I think it's important to also mention is, even though this is at its core a data story, um, I was also able to do a lot of qualitative storytelling, right? I did not just start by throwing the numbers in people's faces. So I started by narrating the proceedings in one of the meetings that I monitored. And thankfully, with support from the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, I was also able to travel to Owerri, the capital of Imo State, to document the effects of these fundraising activities on people on the ground. Even though I wasn't able to talk to lots of people, I was able to highlight, how the husband of this woman was killed. I was able to highlight the challenges faced by police officers in that part of the country. And I think it helps to also put the whole story into perspective, because if you're able to connect the dots, you're able to draw this circle, like draw a full circle by saying this is what is happening online and these are the effects. Um, and of course, I also talked to other people. I talked to an academic researcher. I talked to a high-ranking officer in the Nigerian army, just so I'm able to put everything into proper context. Um, and then with other forms of internet or online investigations, I I added information about the other places that they were getting money. For example, uh, kidnapping, selling merchandise, um, cryptocurrency, and so on. So that just also shows that, even though they were able to raise over $1 million in a year uh, from these Zoom meetings, these fundraising meetings, it's just a fraction of how much they're able to get, because they have a lot of other revenue streams. So, um, so if you're telling data stories too, it's important to not disregard the full picture. So as much as you've been able to gather a significant amount of information, if it is just a fragment of what is the reality, you should also make an attempt to widen the scope of your research or your survey, such that people see beyond uh, the core of what you've done, but also other possibilities that they are probably not paying attention to. I really don't know if that makes any sense. So yes, yeah, there's also a section in the story about how they spend all the money that they are raising, because you also want to preempt the questions that the readers would have. So they would, if they are reading, oh, they've raised $109,000, it's the same question they typically ask about armed groups in the Northeast. Oh, they are collecting 100 million naira as ransom. Where's all this money going to? And then if you're not careful, if you do not answer those questions proactively, it would lead to the rise of conspiracy theories. Who would then start saying, maybe it's the politicians that are funding them, maybe they're using the money for campaigns and so on, or maybe they are smuggling, the money to other countries, etc., etc., etc. So it's also important to proactively or to preempt those kinds of debates and concerns, and which is what I was able to achieve with this section. Talk about how they procure ammunition from the black markets, talk about how they spend money on social welfare schemes and so on. And of course, there's no. It's also really possible that some of that money is being siphoned or embezzled, but I mean, there's no evidence for that at the moment. And yeah, I think my 20 minutes is up, so I'm just going to wrap up here. Thank you all for your rapt attention.
Thank you very much, Kunle. So, I would have even loved that you still probably display that story, so that we can just rush up to ask one or two questions that I probably observed, uh, and I will probably open the floor to everybody. So just to reiterate for everybody, I know one of the two or three of the tools and data portals that Mr. Kunle used to gather these particular reports. He mentioned Flourish, if I'm not mistaken. And Flourish Data Studio is one of the very, very um, 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 uh, popular visualization tools that you can use as journalists to visualize virtually everything that you probably want to work on. It probably has more scope than to me. I mean, I think someone else, I think you even supported me when you said it has more scope than Data Wrapper, right? He also talked about instant data scraper, which helped in scraping some of the informations you needed online. I don't know how available or how open, probably that's where my question will start from. Instant data scraper, is it a paid tool? How open is it, or how accessible is it when you install it as an extension on your Chrome?
It's an entirely open source tool. So for now, I've not seen any limitations to it. I've used it to scrape uh, over 10 pages of Google search results. So it's just if you know your way around, you especially when you know how to do the unlimited scrolling, and if you're able to locate the next button, you can get as much information as possible. The only problem is sometimes, for example, with tweets now, you don't get the full tweets. You only get like the section of the tweet that is visible on that page, right? So that can be a bit limiting, but it's an amazing and extremely useful tool.
I think my next question will go to data sets. Now, take it for me as a data journalist. Sometimes when we are writing stories like this and we conceptualize the idea, there's just like why some people will always argue that sometimes they don't find the data, right? There's also a challenge of having multiple data sets. Then you start looking at, okay, which of it is relevant to the story, which of them should I go away with, which of them should I retain. ACLED is one of the data set that you used a lot in this particular story. So, in at what point, or was there any particular point where you had to decide between okay, ACLED and NST, because NST also compiles data of conflicts? Was there any point you decided to decide between that, or for every of those data sets that you probably used or scripts? At what point did you say okay? Is there a point? Let's say it. Is there a point you decided to say, okay, this is the only data set that really applies to this particular story? And if there was that point, how were you able to make that right judgment? Because a lot of times I have seen news reports that just they're writing about, for instance, out of school, and you just combine several things inside just to drive their point that this is the issue. Meanwhile, you're just putting a lot of data because you want to drive your point. So,
Yeah, unfortunately, NST is even out of production. It's not updating their spreadsheet many months ago. I think following the 2023 elections. So at the moment, ACLED is even the only comprehensive source for data on armed conflicts. And I know there are some people that do their own independent data sourcing, but a lot of them really can't be trusted because of the lack of a transparent methodology. And so unless you have maybe information from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics or like security agencies, ACLED is still the best bet as far as media mapping, getting information from press reports is concerned. So yeah, but if you have multiple sources of data, the best you have to consider, I mean, which one has the information you need? Because as at the time when NST was was still available, it had some unique selling points as well, right? Like you could easily get data for the number of people that were kidnapped, for example. ACLED doesn't really help with that. It can tell you the number of incidents of kidnapping, but not really the number of people affected unless you start reading the notes for each of the incidents. NSA also helped with, you can easily tell the venue or the location that was attacked. So attacks on schools, attacks on mosques, attacks on churches. You don't have to stress to be able to get that information. So again, it's about what you need. But if the data you need is supplied by different independent sources, then I think if you can do the work, it's really good if you compare. Because if you are trying to make an argument uh, that insecurity is getting worse, right? For example, and ACLED tells you it's getting worse, but NST tells a different story. It would be really uh, unfair or hypocritical on your part if you use one and ignore the other, right? And if you use multiple data sources and they point in the same direction, it also strengthens your own argument at the end of the day. So, yeah, in summary, check the one with the better methodology, check the one with the relevant statistics that you need, and also try to use multiple sources just to be on the safe side.
I think my final question will be challenges. Let me not jump into your answer, but really seeing this beautiful work, I want to believe that there were challenges at one point, especially relating to data, probably data access. Um, I don't want to assume that you started the story like June 1st, and before the ending of June, it was published. And you were probably able to do all the whole data gathering and everything within the space of 1 week, and you came up with a beautiful idea. So, challenges. Could you probably discuss or tell us about it and how you probably overcame or were able to manage some of them?
So it was extremely time consuming. It took several months for me to finish the story. And data stories generally, they need a lot of patience. So for me, I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed the the um, journey of discovery. But I don't imagine it to be the same for every other person. So that's one of the things that you have to, take into cognizance if you're trying to do stories like this. Uh, because again, there was no tool available to automate certain things. So you have to use a manual approach. I had to listen in on the meetings. I had to rewind if I did not hear something, or if the summation of the donation from one country did not tally with what I was hearing from the meeting. I would have to, do a double check just to make sure that what I was reporting was accurate. Um, so yeah, it was painstaking. I think there was also the challenge of me having a deadline to work with, especially because the story received some external funding. So they had their own calendar that they were working with, and I had to um, fall in line. So that meant I could not expand the scope the of the data collection as much as I would have loved to. Uh, and it's also really, if I had, so again, if you for a story like this, you probably get a better result if you delegate the data collection to different people. So one person can listen in on maybe two meetings, and within like 2 weeks, everybody's done. Um, but then that also brings up the challenge of consistency, because if everybody is not competent, and if you do not have a unifying, well understood methodology, it might affect the soundness of what you come up with at the end of the day. There was also the language barrier. So there were some, for example, when I first heard the word ejema, I did not know what it meant. I was extremely confused. So I had to I Googled Um, and it took a while. It took me constantly listening on the meetings before I could also eventually get the context of, or even the spelling of the word, so I could do more research. So yeah, the visualization was also a bit tricky. I'm not 100% satisfied with the result, especially for these ACLED visualizations, because I'm not sure they are immediately clear. This one, for example, when you look at it from a glance, um, but this was the best outcome I could come up with, considering the short amount of time that I had at that time.
Mm.
So yeah.
Thank you very much. Someone is asking in the question, in chat box, the person said is a non-journalist and it's just a urban planning researcher. Now, could you kindly speak a little on how to identify transparent methodologies when web scraping?
I'm not sure I understand the first leg of the question, but I don't understand the scraping part of it.
So I think this person is speaking to so the whole idea of web scraping, right? How do you know that how are you able to make that informed decision, especially when you have to check methodologies? Suppose it's for secondary data sets, one can just easily go to the appendix and just say, okay, how did these guys calculate this? But for you that have to collect raw data and have to do the whole
Yeah.
process of this thing. So how do you manage that your transparency so much that you can even build up to this story?
Yeah. So just as a data journalist, you have to make sure that you are not being pulled by your biases. So you're not hell bent on achieving a particular outcome. Or if at the end of the day, what I was able to get was they raised $1,000 in a month, even though it doesn't sound like it's as much a story, it is still what you found. So you have to present that as transparently as possible. If you are web scraping, um, I think the most important thing is the sample size and maybe your query. So if if um, if you are checking for engagement for a narrative, for example, the kind of query that you inserted in the search engine also determines the kind of result that you get. So you have to be very mathematical about because, you know, the way you phrase the queries. Um, the sample size of the things that you scrape is also important, because if it's not significant enough, then it cannot be used to generalize or represent a bigger story. But if you're getting your data from other sources, you know, like the National Bureau of Statistics, for example, they released some information recently about ransoms and kidnapping, and it seems outrageous, but like I've been really, really holding myself back, because how do you say uh, millions of people were kidnapped? It just goes against all the
Exactly.
instincts that I've had as a conflict journalist. But I'm holding myself back because I've not read the reports in full and seen the methodology that they adopted. Uh, uh, but yeah, so again, you cannot criticize until you've read the methodology, and you should also not adopt any information until you've read the methodology. I'll give you an example. When there was a time a colleague of mine was doing a story about air quality, uh, uh, environmental pollution, and all that. And he read a report that said Kano State had the fourth worst quality of air in Africa. And he quoted that. But if you click on the link and read the report, you'll see that there were only 4 cities in Africa that were surveyed. So they put an asterisk next to the table, and then they put a small footnote on that page
Mm.
to say, so if you surveyed 4 cities in Africa out of the hundreds of cities that we have out of 52 countries, uh, and Kano is the number 4 on that list, can you then conclude that Kano has the fourth worst air quality on the
Mm.
continent? It's impossible. It's a very big leap. And
Yeah.
so even though it is accurate as far as that survey goes, but it is not accurate out of context. So the same thing goes for if somebody tells you um, 4 out of 10 Nigerians uh, believe that a woman's place is in the kitchen. It doesn't mean that they've talked to all Nigerians. It could just be maybe they talk to their classmates, right? So you also have to look at is this credible enough to be used to tell this bigger story? And yeah, that's really the most important part. It's not the outcome itself. It's the process at which the outcome was achieved.
Thank you very much for that. I used to say a very popular one. 10.5 million children are out of school that UNICEF brought out. I don't know if you remember that data set some 5 years ago. And that report was just speaking to the northeast region in respect to Borno and all the insecurity that were fighting that particular region was battling with. And everybody always just ran with that report to say 10.5 million Nigerian children are out of school. And anytime I read that report, it's just 5 states they surveyed because of the insecurity crisis. So how come you just generalize it to 10.5 in the whole Nigeria? Right. So that's one of the things. Face, but thank you so much. I want to probably open the mic to one person or two persons who have one or two questions that have not been dropped on the chat or that has not been answered. You can just unmute yourself, or probably give a sign with the finger so that we can just allow you before the next speaker come up. You can just indicate if you probably want to ask any question regarding this. Okay, Mr. Titus, you can go ahead.
Titles from Adeleke University. I think very interesting presentation from the presenter. As a political scientist, I actually learned so many things. Indeed, we're left out with so many data that has to do with the hip-hop activity. I want to ask the presenter, apart from using the data file or different sources to track these statistics, can we also rely much more on MBS, just like you argued a few minutes ago that the stories telling by most of these Mongos data banks are not really interesting. So what about Nigerian security track data? Can it be comparable with your end there? Thank you.
I actually struggle to hear that. I don't know if kind of you
So
got it.
I think his question really was talking in respect to sometimes the complications that comes with Nigerian Bureau of Statistics or Nigerian data platforms bringing
Yeah.
out wrong methodology or even changing some of this methodology. We have the case of the unemployment rates. In the next month, we'll start seeing changes in inflation rate and GDP right now. So sometimes you struggle with this. Is this something that we as journalists can rely on solely? Please hold a
Yeah.
thought on that. Let
Okay.
Media Career for Development ask the question. Then we'll just do those two questions, then allow you to go. So you can go ahead, sir, to ask a question. Media Career Development.
So, good afternoon. This is not
Mr.
really a
Keke.
question, just to say well done, but I just want to chip in something I've thought about. So sometimes we hear journalists say there are no data, which is true. But I want to advise that we need to consciously begin to assemble our data in case we need it as an organization or individual. One very simple example is like, so a journalist covers maybe a state covers a commissioner for finance for 5 years. Every year budget is released. You have those data with you. You don't keep it.
Is that from my end or from his end?
Yeah,
I
he's
think
gone for it. So
okay.
maybe the
Please, you can
analysis.
go ahead to just answer the question on second data set.
Yes. So I mean, everything. Nobody is God, right? It's only God that can give you something that is unbiased and it is the gospel truth, and it has looked at all situations and possibilities, and eventualities. So as long as it is human beings that are responsible for gathering the data, there will always be shortcomings, there will always be flaws, there will always be inadequacies. Um, as far as Nigeria goes, the NBS is still the ground norm when it comes to sources for data, uh, because even the World Bank and other intergovernmental agencies rely on them. Um, uh, but the problem sometimes is the NBS also relies heavily on various government MDAs. So the data from these MDAs can be flawed, right? If the Nigerian police does not supply data about crime statistics, for example, or if they supply the wrong data, there is nothing they can do. We've seen instances where in the we've seen instances where government agencies, including the NBS, make some inconsistent claims, right? We've seen instances where I think the Ministry of Education would retract information after journalists point out that they've made some mistakes. But by and large, you are just doing a comparative analysis of which one is better. Would you rather rely on the NBS, or you'd rely on a small NGO that is trying to raise funds by any means necessary, uh, uh, or your own very limited resources of
Sources, yeah.
collecting data? So that's just it. You go with the best option available.
Thank you very, very
And I
much.
absolutely agree with Mr. Lekon Fodirin too that journalists should do more in collecting and publishing their own data. Um, some of us have access to certain things, like you said, budget information, for example. There are journalists who are assigned to covering the National Assembly or various state assemblies, and they have access to certain things. So when we are complaining that uh, maybe certain states have not published their budget in 5 years, they've probably gotten the hard copies. So it's all you have to do is just scan those copies, use optical character recognition, and then you can grant access to everybody who wants to access those documents. And we should also always try to gather our own original data. If there's no data available,
Much as possible.
there's also there are things you can do to, through surveys, through internet research, through data scraping, and so on. There's still a lot of room for work to be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kunle. I really appreciate this time, and I know we really appreciate this time. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. I want to use this opportunity to also introduce every other person to DataFight, as we have a platform that we've created called Dataplex, where you can also request for data. You can just I'm going to put the link to that in the chat box, so that for some of we've also discovered in DataFight, right, that sometimes access to data can be really challenging. Sometimes this access are just restricted to some particular institution, some of which we have built a niche on, right? So if you have challenges in accessing some of this data, you can always write to us in DataFight, and I know that we with our connection and all, but we can always try to get those data for you. I know there are still some questions that are coming in. I'm going to try as much as possible to respond to them. But in the meantime, can I introduce, I know he's already on the call, the second speaker, Samuel Ajala. Please, you can still go ahead to ask your question and write your question down. As much as I can even respond, I would do that. And I know that for some that I can't, subsequent speakers would do that. In our link to the registration, we also ask participants to drop some story ideas they had probably seen data around and they want us to analyze it like we said, this training is a phased training. So this is the first phase. 2 others are going to coming up next month and next year, also in January. So by that time, we're going to send it out and we're going to review some of those stories and we're going to get back to you some of those questions. So without much further ado, let me introduce Samuel Ajala, who is a science communication researcher and journalist working at the intersection of climate change, energy transition, and sustainability issues in Africa. He's also a contributor and an analyst to Gas Outlook, Table Media, which is Climate and Africa, and other local and international media outlets. Samuel is a graduate of the Department of Communications and at the University of Ankara, if I am correct, where his research is really focused on environment and climate change. So, Samuel, thank you very much for being part of us. And you can go ahead to share your slides and let me know if you have access to share the screen. I see that Mr. Lekon Foduri still want to say 1 or 2 things. I don't know if, sir, you're still willing to talk or we should go ahead. Okay, so Samuel, you can just go ahead. I guess it's just.
Good morning. Sorry, good afternoon, good morning. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it. Please go ahead. I will try to mute Mr. Lekon. I think he's on the road, so the phone is messing up.
So thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm Samuel Ajala. As Kehinde rightly said, I'm actually I'm currently doing my master's program in communication, and my research is focused on environmental and climate communication. So yeah, I was actually listening to Mr. Akunle's presentation, and I must really say it's actually so insightful. Yeah, Mr. Akunle is like our big boss in space. So I'm just going to be giving you should I say, a run through of a cross-border collaborative project that we actually started working on in 2023. It's a report that was actually funded by Clean Energy Wire, which is a media platform that is based in Berlin. Today I'm just going to be running you through the process of how we came about with the whole reporting, considering the fact that it was a cross-border investigation, and the central theme, or let me say the central topic, was actually about Shell's controversial data around methane emission. And the key part of it is that, or let me say the main thing is that when it comes to methane emission reporting, we realize that we actually do not have we don't have people reporting more about methane emission. So the only reporting has always been around carbon emission, all of that. But the fact remains that methane emission is actually more deadly than carbon emission. Yeah, it's like methane emission is like times 80 of what you can get from carbon emission, and methane emission actually usually occurs as a result of gas flaring. And so I was talking about the conceptualization of the story idea, and our case study was actually about Shell's controversial data around methane emission. We looked at Nigeria, Argentina, in Germany, and we also considered US. And so we actually tried to identify the key issues or trend. When you talk about that, you're looking at what is the climate impact of methane emission, and because Shell has always been or let me say, Shell actually has a vision that by 2050 they are going to transition to a clean form of energy. And so this is more Shell is they do more of talking, but when it comes to acting, and when it comes to what is happening, in the real sense, maybe let's say, for instance, in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta, you will realize that they are still going on with their oil exploration, despite the fact that they've stated that they actually want to transition into clean form of energy and all of that. And so the compelling research question for us is the fact that the emission figures reported by Shell, how accurate are they? Yeah, that's one thing we're actually asking ourselves. How accurate? Because Shell, one thing they actually said from their reports. Let me share. Okay, I don't know if you can see my screen.
I can see it perfectly.
Okay. So the one about Shell Sustainability Report 2022, can you see that aspect?
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing we're able to do, the first step for us, was that when we went to Shell's website, they actually have somewhere. Okay, let me go back. So I can, yeah. So they actually have their sustainability reports, that they started releasing from 2018. And as at then, when we started the story, it was like the time frame for us was like 2018 to 2022. And so what we had to do was actually to look into the data for each year. So, and we sort of did a compare and contrast to see if Shell was actually, progressing about their claim of reducing methane emission. And one thing we were able to find out was that, based on our research, was that Shell's claim of actually reducing methane emission, is actually misleading. And during the course of my presentation, I'm going to be taking us through, how we're able to, arrive at the conclusion and what we're actually able to do exactly. So I've spoken about the data collection and research. Like our source of data basically was actually, like I shared now, was actually from Shell Sustainability Report from 2018 to 2022. And we also use some, independent research data, from NGOs and other critical stakeholders to corroborate reporting. And the other part also, we also studied, satellite imagery and also scientific studies so that we can be able to, understand, at what extent, has Shell been able to, reduce their methane emission, as they actually claimed. So basically, the method we used was, we analyzed the emission trend, looking at it from 2018 to 2022. As I go further in my presentation, you're going to get to understand better. And we also did a sort of cross-referencing report, versus observed data. So we look at the reports that they actually had, and we also actually observe the data. So I would say the best practices when it comes to data collection, is to actually verify the source for credibility. And from our end, our source for credibility was actually Shell's website, because since the main focus or central theme of what we were working on was actually about Shell, so the best place for us to go to get our data was actually on Shell's website, because so they have a data and report part of their website that we're able to get our data from. And we actually use both qualitative and quantitative data. So one thing I would actually say is that, as journalists, as researchers, we need to be aware about, potential data gaps or biases, because definitely this is the data that is coming from Shell, and to a large extent, you will agree with me that there's going to be bias and there will be some gaps, because they are the one releasing data by themselves. There's no external party or external body, that could actually, should I say, verify the data they are actually releasing. And that was more like a should I say, a source of attention to us, because we felt like, this data that Shell is releasing, there's no third party involved. We don't really understand the methodology. We don't understand how they came about with their conclusion of saying that, from 2018 to 2022, they've actually been able to reduce methane emission. Yeah, so I think I'll skip that part. So for our data analysis techniques. So there are some questions that we actually, look at basically, in terms of the discrepancies around the reported data and also, versus the actual data, and what trend were we able to, identify over time. And so one thing we actually noticed, was that based on sales sustainability reports, there was a bit of inconsistency, like in their scope one emission when it comes to upstream gas flaring in Nigeria between 2018 to 2022. And so Shell actually claimed in their reports, that from 2018 to 2022, um, so if you look at the data, you realize that in 2018, like the metric tons was actually around 4 million. In 2019, it was the same thing. Then 2020 it went up. 2021, still at the same level. Then 2022, it came down. So that's like, Shell claiming that, methane emission reduction, in Nigeria actually, went down drastically. And we knew that there was something that was wrong with that data, in the sense that we had to talk to scientists, talk to experts, and watchdog organization, to actually be certain that this data that Shell is actually presenting, is it factual enough? And the conclusion we're able to come to, after we were able to investigate and all of that, was that we realized that the data Shell released or has been releasing over time is actually controversial and misleading. Yeah, because there's no third party to actually verify how true their data was, and it was something of a great concern for us because due to the emergence of climate change issues and all of that, and countries, international oil companies wanting to transition to a clean form of energy. So over time, we realized that the concept around international oil companies claiming that they are transitioning, there's a term called greenwashing. It's mostly about greenwashing, in the sense that in a real sense they are going to tell you that we are reducing our carbon emission, reducing our methane emission, but in the real sense, they are doing the opposite. Like as they are reducing their carbon emission, their methane emission, like oil exploration, gas flaring is actually still happening in the Niger Delta, in most of the countries that they are actually operating. And so while we're actually doing our data analysis, I would say that one of the practical tools that was actually very useful for us was we actually do a lot with using Excel, Google Sheet for our basic analysis, and we also make use of Power BI for data visualization. So storytelling with data. So like how do you craft narrative? Like so for us, how are we able to use the data we actually got to like craft a narrative, to do our visualization, and yeah, basically. So I think one thing we're actually able to do, the first part, like I said, is that we're actually able to substantiate the fact that Shell's claim of actually reducing their methane emission, is actually misleading. So, we had to use visuals to actually support the claim, using charts, infographics, and map. And so the other part also too was that we're also able to map out, the emission sources, yeah, and we're also we're able to use this to show the discrepancies in the data over time, to show that it's actually a faulty one. So publishing a report for us. So for us, so for the report investigation, we actually spent I think about 6 to 8 months, yeah, because at first, I think the first draft we had was about 5,000, 6,000 words, and so we had to cut it down, yeah, because the platform we actually wanted to publish, like there is a word limitation, when you're doing, investigation, because at times you can do research and you can have bulky stuff, but as a journalist, as a researcher, the interesting part of it is that you want to be able to communicate your findings in a way that is not going to appear too boring, for your readers. And so that was why we had to work on summarizing what we have actually discovered during the course of our investigation. And so we also had to look into incorporating interactive visualization for engagement. So I'm just going to share the story. It was published on Premium Times, the cable, and also a lot of platforms in Europe and South America. Okay. So so also considering Shell's role, when it comes to methane emission, Shell is actually the world's fifth largest oil producer, and they are the fifth, and they actually make their revenue from exploration, production, refining, and chemical operations across about 70 countries. And in the recent, the company's profit was actually increasing. That as at 2022, their profits had doubled up. So in 2018, Shell actually made headlines, by announcing their intent that, okay, they want to lead, the sector's effort to, control, leakage when it comes to methane emission. They actually made a vow, that they were going to keep their methane emission intensity below 0.2%, by using advanced, equipment, to actually detect and repair methane leaks and, replacing their older equipment. So based on our finding, we realized that the vow or the promise that Shell actually made, about keeping their methane emission intensity below 0.2%, is actually false. False and misleading, because in a real sense, when we did our investigation, we realized that Shell actually have been doing the opposite of what they have been saying, and we were able to also get data from independent organization, independent body, that actually also proved that in the research nothing has actually been done. It has been more or less about less talk more and less action, for sure. So personally, I also looked at the Shell's ongoing methane emissions state in Nigeria, and one thing I was able to find out, or one thing I was able to establish, was the fact that in Nigeria, actually Shell actually helped the federal government to they actually joined the Nigerian gas flare commercialization program, alongside other producers or other international oil companies. So, and the plan was that they wanted to achieve zero routine gas flaring by 2035, and so this was launched in 2018, and in 2022 the program was relaunched. So so what I find out was that I realized that the scope 1 emission for the upstream flaring in Nigeria, it actually witnessed 2 million metric tons of emission reduction. That was in with a figure of about 3 million metric tons in 2022 compared to to 5 million metric tons. And I knew that the data actually shows that the level of emission actually reduced, while in 2020 it actually increased to about 5 million tons of emission. So the question I had to ask myself, we were asking was that what exactly was Shell actually doing in the recent to reduce their methane emission. So we had to speak to experts, people who had worked with Shell before, who actually understand the scope and mechanism behind methane emission reduction, and so that they can explain data for us. Yeah, because if you are saying you are reducing your methane emission, and from data, gas flaring is actually still increasing in Nigeria, then that means there's a contradiction. So how exactly were you able to arrive at your data? So speaking to experts, they made us realize that the data that was released by Shell is actually misleading. Yeah, and it actually raises a lot of questioning. Yeah, because there was no independent body, involved when Shell was actually gathering their data. So, and in that case, that's where the place of bias comes in. Like, as a company that is trying to, protect their reputations and all of that, yeah, it's easier, for you to, manipulate your data, just to make people, just to make people feel like, you're actually keeping up to your commitment, because this is like a business, it's a business, and definitely every business, they want to make profit, no matter their commitment to whatever they've said, and and all of that. So also, we were also able to analyze a BBC investigation, look into some satellites, detections, um, just to be able to, like, track, methane emission. And so one thing we're also able to realize is the fact that, there are millions of tons of, undeclared emission from gas flaring, at oil fields where Shell is actually operating. Not only Shell, ExxonMobil, and even other international oil companies. And, a lot of satellite data providers, like independent ones, have also compared the methane output of fossil fuel. And the one thing they were able to realize that, Shell and Chevron were actually the worst performance, when it comes to, methane, emission reduction. Meanwhile, they were speaking the contrary, in the data that was actually released. So, like I said, our investigation was published across Europe, South America, and Nigeria. Yeah. So for me, about the takeaway, I would say that data journalism actually, requires a structured approach. Talking about conceptualizing, talking about your research, talking about cleaning your data, analyzing your data, and also publish it. So another thing we also need to note is that transparency and verification are very critical when it comes to using data to produce use data to tell your story. Yeah, transparency and verification are actually critical. Like I've explained, it's not enough for an international company to come out and say they are doing this, but when they are doing this, they need to make sure that they're actually transparent enough. Yeah, in the sense that they need to also involve independent bodies, so that they can be able to verify that, okay, what they have actually said, or so they can actually be involved, in why they are trying to come up with their data and all of that, so as to ensure that they are not being biased. Yeah, so I think I'm just going to stop there because of my time, and I could not really do a proper run through because of the time constraints. All of that.
Thank you very much, Samuel. If you can still stay on the story, I think someone said you should share the link to the story. So you can help us drop that on the chat box. Few questions. I think the first will be, and thank you for that beautiful presentation. I was looking forward to you because I know that climate data are really very, very sensitive. Are really very sensitive data sets. And just to reiterate for everybody that are on the call, this story was born out of the fact that a document was produced already. So all you had to do, right, was study the document and see that there were loopholes, what we call outliers, that didn't really agree with themselves, right?
Yes.
And this just answers the question that someone was asking during coolest times, that, okay, how do you verify secondary data sets that have been published? Anybody could randomly run with this particular report and say, Shell, according to Shell, they have so, and publish it on a news platform, and those go away. But we studied it over that time in trends and discovered that, okay, this does not really agree, and decided to take a further step to investigate what was wrong with it. Now, I think the first question especially in understanding climate data sets, is the complications around it. Getting, I know that we had once discussed, this is between me and you, discussing something around how to harvest data that tests for emissions, especially in Nigeria. And to get that kind of data set, it is almost inaccessible. Let's put it like that. So, how were you able to work your way around to? Wait, did you at what? Was there any point that you probably collected your sample of and took it to the laboratory to go and test it by yourself? I mean, could you just walk us through that?
Yeah, so I think one thing we actually were able to do was that um, so I think one thing we're able to actually do in the research was that after we've analyzed the data, we discovered that there was something wrong with the data. Yeah, because you cannot say or you cannot publish a report that you are reducing methane emission, yeah, actually globally, and and in the real sense, like gas flaring is actually still, is still high, so one thing we're able to do to establish that fact was that we had to actually analyze other independent body data. Yeah, we analyzed data from International Energy Agency, global methane emission. There's other agencies like that too, that they also do stuff around methane emission. So it was more like for us was that we actually compare and contrast what Shell had and also compared with what other independent or established body their data. And so that was how we were able to identify, that there was a gap, there was a gap in the data. And so what we also had to do further was that we also had to speak to experts, experts that actually understand the nitty-gritty around methane emission and all of that. And so we're also able to analyze the data from their end too. And we actually we got the same results. And so they were also able to make us understand that, Shell's data about reducing methane emission is actually misleading and is actually false, yeah, because while they were doing their investigations and carrying out their data, there was no independent body that was involved in it. So one of the way you could actually make your should I say your data at times, especially as an international oil company, and you've actually made a commitment that okay, you actually want to reduce, you want to achieve net zero by 2050, is that you're supposed to involve other independent bodies, because definitely if you are doing that by yourself, you are going to be biased. So that actually raises suspicion, yeah, and it was based on that we actually knew that there was actually a finding, or there was actually a story for us in this, yeah, because
Awesome.
it's actually suspicious to want to do that.
I think the final question I would like to ask is, and which you could probably keep short, keep as short as possible, is I know colleagues who have done cross-border investigations. How are you able to manage data sets like this when you have to collaborate with journalists in South Africa, journalists in Germany, journalists in USA, and you're all working on the same story, right? How were you able to merge your data together so much that I'd once done a climate environmental story like that, where it took us time, right, to gather and find an idea first, where we saw that the data was related to all of them, and we had to now write the story. And that took several months. In fact, a year before that story got published at the end of the day, because of cross-border works around stories and data. So how were you able to, should I say, overcome that challenge?
Yeah, it's actually a challenge, yeah, because the investigation I think took us about, I think we spent 6 to 8 months, yeah, before we were able to finally publish and and all of that. So one thing that actually helped was that we actually use what was it called? Google Docs. Yeah, Google Docs. So it's either we can talk about the word part of Google Doc, like the Google Doc itself, talk about the spreadsheet also too. So it was more like for the team, yeah, we're actually working together, or we're seeing what we're actually doing in real time, based on using Google Sheets. Yeah. And so we had series of meetings. Like when we're in meetings like that, we just, everybody, opens their Google spreadsheet. Then so we begin to like look into the data one after the other, and we begin to compare and contrast. And so if there's any gray area, so we're just going to point it out, we're going to note it. And so once we are done assessing all the data, then we're going to come together and talk about our observation, and we're going to look into it critically and see a way we can be able to, to press forward, concerning what we have actually, discovered. Yeah, it can be so challenging, yeah, because I recall that there were instances where we actually kind of, that's a technically fault, yeah, not like fight, raising blows and all of that, but we actually had issues, in the sense that at some point, yeah, we realized that okay, maybe some people we are working, more than the other persons, and in fact, there was a team member that was actually dragging, like, dragging. The guy was like dragging us and wasting time on the investigation and all of that. So, but one thing we're able to do is that we actually had to put into consideration that we all have a diverse background. Yeah, so we just have to note that, and to be able to reach a meeting point that, okay, we are different people from different continents. So we just have to be able to understand everybody, based on their identity and perspective, so that we could actually be able to produce something substantial for our reporting.
Thank you very much. Titus Monday, you have your hands up. Can you quickly ask your question so that we can move on to the next speaker? Samuel, I'll probably ask you to help us write out some of the tools, websites, if you have some of them, where you got some of this data. If you can help us write it out in the chat, or tools that you used in visualization, just write it out in the chat. Then while you're listening to Titus Monday question.
All right. Good afternoon and good morning to the presenter. I actually listened to his presentation fully because of the major issues that it's affecting the Niger Delta region per se. And when I listened to his presentation on the methodology section, I think he was able to ascertain the third party as a challenge, because if we listen to, or if we look at what had happened in the region, the Shell Petroleum Corporation has not been in operation at least since early 90s. And some of these, you know, reports or data they present to the public sometimes is just a one-sided aspect, of which I think dependency school would always argue the base or the source of that information. However, the question I have for the presenter is that, of course, the emission of these, international corporations or companies operating in that region, it's not only in Shell alone. We have other multinational corporations or oil multinational corporations operating in that region. And how was he able to, although his focus was on Shell? And my question is Shell still operating in that region? If they have not, or if they are not operating in that region, how do they present most of these facts on cleaning up of the environment? Because I know there is a mitigation and even the intervention of the federal government in the recent times, most especially in Ogoni land, is not really live up to the expectations. Talk more of coming back to that their operation. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your question. So about Shell's operation in the Niger Delta, whether they are still active. So in January this year, Shell actually announced that they were going to exit their onshore operation in the Niger Delta. and they actually wanted to sell their assets to a conglomeration of about five Nigerian oil and gas companies called Renaissance Group. And yeah. So that's like Shell wanting to, like, should I say, run away from their mass. In fact, what I would have used actually for the purpose of this training, we also worked on another cross-border investigation, which was funded by European Journalism Fund. Yeah, we are like about a team of also 4 journalists, across different continents. Yeah, so the question we're asking is that Shell, after the decades of destruction, like devastation, environmental degradation that Shell has actually committed in Niger Delta. So now Shell actually announced that they want to exit their onshore operation in Niger Delta. And so it's actually a way of saying that, Shells, they want to actually abandon their responsibility, because they knew that there were a lot of, litigations here and there, court cases and all of that. So they are just technically running away from all those, court cases and, all the damages they've done in the Niger Delta, and they want to run away. So though they claim that they are not running away, they are staying in Nigeria, but technically that's what they are doing. Because when you sell a company, when you sell your company or your asset to another company, so whoever you are selling your asset to, so that means you are transferring your assets, you are transferring your liability. So that means all your court cases, all your litigation and everything is going to be transferred to the new company. So that's like a way of saying Shell actually, they actually, in a way, ran from their responsibility, ran from taking action for the damages they've actually done in the Niger Delta. So just recently, just this week, the federal government, in October, they had earlier rejected Shell's proposal to exit their onshore operation. And just this week, the federal government of Nigeria actually, approved the transaction for Shell. And the approval came because, was it on Monday? So on Monday, Shell also announced that they were going to invest in offshore operation, like, deep water operation in the Niger Delta. So it was more like the reason why federal government actually had to approve that. Like, so federal government did it in a way that, okay, if you can invest in our offshore, so we are going to allow you to exit the onshore operation. We are going to allow you to abandon, decades of, environmental damages you have done to our people and all of, and that was what played out technically, because, federal government finally approved the transaction. So that means that Shell is not going to be held accountable for everything they've actually done in the Niger Delta, because now technically, like, another company is coming in, and so all the litigation cases are actually going to be transferred to those new companies. So to talk about the reason why we actually focused on Shell, so definitely for the scope of this research, Shell was actually our focus. That there were also other international oil companies that are operating in Niger Delta and all of that. But the reason why we actually had to focus on Shell was because Shell has actually been operating in Nigeria for as far back as 1960s or thereabouts. Yeah, been a long time. So in fact, they've been one of the international oil companies that have actually been involved in oil exploration in Nigeria and all of that. So, and that was why we just had to like focus on Shell. Not like other international oil companies are also not causing environmental damage in Nigeria. Just to
Thank you very much, Samuel. I really appreciate. I really appreciate your time to come and discuss with us. We do well to send the slides to you. We'll be pasting our assessment form right now online. So if you can copy the link so that you can just give a review. While I call up the final speaker for today, recall that I said that this training is in phases. So there are still a lot of several aspects of journalism that we're going to touch. We've been able to touch conflict, we've touched climate change and energy transition. And right now we're going to be touching business and data, which is going to be handled by Lucy Okonkwo, a research analyst at DataFight. And she's also an economist who wants to use data to change the narrative and help build the nation. So as Lucy prepares, Samuel, you can stop sharing your screen right now so that Lucy can come up. We're going to be dropping an assessment form that we'd like everybody to sign so that we can provide some of these links and some of these slides to you while we also make preparations for that. So in subsequent classes, like we have said, we're going to be discussing a whole ball game on data-driven reports around gender, solution reporting, human rights, investigations, fact-checking, very well, fact-checking, some data-driven stories around fact-checking, and also introduce you to some of the other AI tools that are developed by DataFight and other that we've seen that also journalists could work with. So can we just use this moment to welcome Lucy Okonkwo? If she's around, she can start.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lucy. Can you all hear me and see me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Kehinde. I am very honored and privileged to be on this set this afternoon. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. All right. Like Mr. Kehinde said, I write the Marina Metama angle, which is the business angle, which deals with both macro and micro business economic issues. So it's around businesses, it's around even governmental policies that are affecting businesses in Nigeria. So that's what I write. And so over time, I've come to figure out that because when we write, sometimes we have to look across other report journals, because sometimes we get when we want to source our news, like other speakers have said, when we want to source our news, we go to other reports to find out if every single thing that is being said it's uniform. Let's say, what are they saying? How are they saying it? Where are they saying it from? So we look across other business reporting style, especially how they use data to report. And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes we find it a bit just more about reporting than about data analysis. So this afternoon, I just want to share with us a bit on how we at DataFight especially use to write our data analytics stories. And we hope it's going to help you maybe in subsequent writings, maybe your own personal write-up for other business articles or other articles in general, because this framework can be used anywhere. It can be used to write an environmental report. It can be used to write a social report. It can be used to write any kind of report, especially when it comes to data. It helps you be more comprehensive when you write. It helps you be more insightful when you write. And it helps you make the current news or what you're trying to report very direct and better understood and clear. All right. Okay. So we call it the 7 boxes. We call it the 7 boxes. I have heard some people say that when they read some of our write-ups, it's actually so direct. It's so direct. And sometimes people don't want to, what they call it, they don't want to go around in stories. They don't just want to be, when you say, I want to write a story, sometimes people have to start looking at, digging into the details and say, okay, what's the report about? Where is the report? What's going on? They start trying to find out what you're trying to say. There's no clarity. You're going in circles. So this 7 box style, some people, they use inverted triangle. I'm sure you might have heard it before. Some people, they start from the top bottom. Some people start from the bottom top. But this one, we call it the 7 boxes framework. And we hope it's going to help you in analyzing data stories. All right. So the first thing on these 7 boxes, as you can see on the screen, is reporting. All right. What this part helps you do is, in critical analysis, because when you're writing a data story, it's more like critically analyzing a subject. There's a famous saying we have at DataFight is let data tell the story. Let data be the one informing what you tell the audience. So like you listen to a report and they're saying 1 million people died, and then you're looking at the data and the data is saying only 30 people died and maybe the other 970 people were injured, and other people will say 1,000 people died. Now, from data, you will be able to get that 30 people died and just 970 were injured. So your report will give us clarity. on what you're trying to point out first. So let it get to the reader. Oh, what am I trying to say? What are you trying to tell us? Why should we listen to this report? What are you trying to say? So the first step is reporting. And what reporting helps you do is the same thing active listening helps you do in critical analysis. So it involves ensuring a full understanding of the message being conveyed by paying close attention to both the content and underlying emotions. So in this box, we want to help you comprehend clearly what you're trying to say. So I'll be showing you an example of a story I've written at the end of this, of showing you the whole 7-box steps so that you will see what I'm trying to say. All right, so the first thing you do is report. Let's say 30 people were injured at just as we heard from the Ibadan crisis, 32 children were killed from the Ibadan Christmas stampede. Now, that's the report. That's the first thing. That's the news. Now, by the time you said that, I'm like, okay, let me see what happened. What are they trying to say? Let me see. You now get the reader interested in trying to read the full story. All right, so the next thing you're going to do after reporting is the relevance. What's the relevance of your story? Why should I pay attention to your story? Okay, 32 children died from Christmas stampede. All right, what's the relevance of this story? We hear people die every day. So why is this story quite relevant? Why is cause and effect? What's the cause? What's the effect of this story? Why should I listen to it? Why is this information important? What's the potential impact to the audience or listener of your report? And then you establish the relevance of the information, provide the foundation of deeper analysis, and help focus on meaningful content. So you tell us, why should we listen to your report? What's the cost? Okay, 32 children died. What does that mean? What would that cost the listener? What is the effect on the audience that is listening to or trying to read your story? So we have to know the relevance. What's the relevance of your story? Why is it important to me? Why is it important to the listener to even continue reading your story? All right. So the next thing you're going to do is reflect. In reflection, what we do in this stage is we get data. So how has this evolved over time? This story you're trying to tell us is not the first time this has happened, and it's not the second time. So how has this evolved? I remember when I was telling a story on interest rates. This year, we've seen interest rates increase at least 6 times. And so we give the trend analysis of a progressive reporting of how this thing has happened over time. Even the 32 children that have died in Ibadan Christmas stampede, I'm sure there were cases over time, maybe not in 1980, maybe 1990, maybe sometime early 2000, there was such a stampede before. So now you have to pull out those data and help us understand that there's a trend to this. Maybe this has been happening every 4 years. Maybe this has been happening every 3 years. Maybe it's something that people need to take note of because it's happening. The occurrence of it happening is, it can be, how would I say this? It can be understood. Like people can use through the trend to understand, oh, this is what is going to happen. It can be used as a form of projection of, oh, this happens every 3 years. This happens every 2 years. This happens every 4 years. So you can use that to be able to make your story more detailed. So data will show you how it has been over time. And that's what reflecting on the news or your report, that's your first story, your first item, will help us understand. All right, the next thing on the list is ranking. What do we mean by ranking? So for your data story to be a bit more insightful, to be more comprehensive, to be more detailed and have a bit of flesh, like people always say, is you rank the story. Now, ranking can be it can be in different styles. You can rank a story by, let's say you're doing a country data, you can rank it by, oh, this nation versus this nation. You can rank it by specific details. It can be ranked by number, how big it is, how small it is. You can rank it by different things. And now what ranking helps us do is it helps us make sense of complex data sets and uncover hidden insights. Ranking allows us a bit of comparison between various options. And it helps us prioritize a way that leads to more efficient and well-rounded conclusions. It helps you rank stories, rank details, and rank patterns of that trend that has been happening to help you know, okay, this has been happening. Now, this trend has been happening, but it's not secluded to maybe Nigeria. This trend has also been happening in China. This trend has also been happening in sub-Saharan Africa. This same thing has also been happening in other parts of Africa. So you try to rank your story to give it a bit more detail and make it more insightful that people can be able to draw conclusion, and it helps you un-isolate your report. Basically, your report is not isolated. It's not like this is the first time this is happening. So it helps you give a bit of like un-isolate your report. All right, so the next thing you do is relate. What we mean by relate? In this step, the trend analysis and the rankings are applied to determine whether the initial hypothesis, that is your report connected to the cause and effect? Is it relevant? Is it related? Is it correlated? Economic terms, is it correlated? Are they linked? So that 32 children died in the Christmas stampede, is it relevant? Is it collaborating with what you said is the cause or effect? Maybe they shouldn't, the cause of it was they were trying to hand out 5,000 naira in this tipping economy, pardon my language, and then, you know, maybe it correlates to the fact that poverty has increased in the country. So now parents are now not only coming out to hustle, but sending out their children to hustle. So you have to find a way to collaborate your report with the relevance, with the cause and effect you're trying to tell us. Is it related? Is it not related? And are there any relationship to the story? If there's no relationship to the story, it's okay. You can actually tell us in the story that there's no relationship with what you're trying to say, that maybe there are other causes for this. So this will help you know that are there other causes for this beside what you're trying to tell us is the cause and effect. Sometimes you can use data to run regressions. Sometimes you can use data to run a correlation to find out if they are correlated. Or sometimes it can even be story over time, trend. I can let you understand that this is related. All right, now we'll go to rate. Now, what does it mean by rating? This is where you get the opinion of others. So now you've done a comprehensive analysis of your data from number 1 down to number 5. Now on the 6th part, which is rating, you tell us past results, you give us opinion of others to make it bulkier and to collaborate with what you're trying to say, that, hey, this thing you're trying to report is a very serious issue. People should take note of it because other experts, these are what other experts are saying about what I've reported, what you reported over time. All right. So after that, you round up your story. Round it up by concluding and telling us your own opinion. It can be your own opinion. You can conclude by telling us the opinion of others. So that's how you do a data analytic story without you sharing your opinions. Because sometimes we read data analytics stories and it's all about people's opinions rather than the data telling the story. So this is how you can make your data tell the story without you just throwing out your opinions and making your story, your data story, look biased. All right. So now I'm going to be sharing my screen. I'm going to be sharing a story I wrote. I'm going to be sharing a story I wrote that that can give us a better detail of what I'm trying to say. All right, okay, so this is a story I wrote on when the federal government did a 50% cutoff on the CNG conversion kit. So first, I went direct to give a report. The report says the federal government has announced a plan to subsidize the cost of compressed natural gas vehicle conversion kits by 50% for road transport union members nationwide. This was my story. I wanted to report this to tell the audience, to tell the public that, oh, now the federal government, you cannot get your conversion kit for CNG at 50% less. All right, now, what's the use of this story? Why is it relevant? Why is this relevant? Now, the 2 paragraphs after this, which says the goal of the conversion incentive program is to create a cleaner and cheaper energy options for Nigerian motorists. The second one is also very important to the audience. Now, the federal government has, I'm sure so many people did not know that Tinubu's government has a CNG initiative, an initiative to clean Nigeria's air and make it cleaner and cheaper. So now I got to announce that this is the relevance of this story. It is the aim to achieve presidential CNG initiative of converting 1 million vehicles from the use of petrol to compressed natural gas before 2027. Now, that's why the reader should pay attention. Now, this is the relevance of the story, that the federal government wants at least 1 million vehicles in Nigeria to convert, to stop using petrol and stop leaning in on crude oil, but more on compressed natural gas before 2027. Now, what's the third part? The third part was, I said, reflect. How do we reflect over time? We went to get a data set of Nigeria that showed how petroleum fueled cars were releasing carbon emission. Remember, we said the relevance is create a cleaner and cheaper energy option, cleaner and cheaper. And then the CO2 emission of transport in Nigeria, we got this data from International Energy Agency. So there are secondary data that you can get that will be able to help you tell your story. Sometimes we always have this saying at Data Fight, when you don't get, some news are quite fresh and new. When you can't get a direct data set, there are other data sets around that story that can help you explain what you're trying to say. And so this data set is trying to help us understand that this is the carbon emission of Nigeria by transport. So transport alone, this is the amount of energy it's emitting in Nigeria. So that's the reflect, that's the trend analysis. Over time, as you can see, we started doing this data from 2011 down to 2021, which is the recent data they have, showing us that Nigeria's carbon emission over time has been increasing. It has not been going down, it has been increasing. Now, the fourth thing was rank. Now, how did we rank this story? We ranked this story by checking the carbon emission of the different areas where carbon emission is gotten from in Nigeria. So we got the carbon emission from transport, from industries, from electricity and heat producers, from residents, from commercial and public services, carbon emission from agriculture, final carbon emission from energy industries. And we found out that transport actually still has the highest carbon emission in Nigeria. So you see how your ranking can help you isolate your report and make you know that, oh, what I'm trying to say is actually true. And what I'm trying to say is actually true. This also can also serve as a trend analysis. It can also serve as your three. So it can also serve as your three with this as well. So now we were trying to relate and reflect. Reflection, like I said, is saying, does your hypothesis, is it real? Is your 2 and your 1 really collaborating? Are they telling the same story? We got another data from a report by California Air Resource Board showing how indeed CNG can actually make the energy cleaner, can actually make the spaces cleaner. As you can see from this, by the time we're done, we found out that cars that were CNG cars, which uses less methane. So it's a compressed methane compressed into 1%, that cars that have ethanol are actually have less carbon emission than cars that are using petrol. So as you can see from this, we're trying to correlate that our 1 and 2 are actually true. It's actually real that CNG cars can actually make Nigerians' airspace less have less carbon emission. And then we went ahead to give the review of other people's opinion, other news article opinions on what we're trying to say. And then we ended up concluding. One thing you should take note of is that as you report your data stories, make sure your sources are authentic. Make sure your sources are sources that your sources are sources that are real, and when people are standard, basically, because there's sometimes you can go get your secondary data from an unknown source or a scrupulous source that when people go back and look at that data, they can't find it on even that source. And that source cannot even relate their data to some other data set that they found the source. We've had situations where we got data, secondary data, and we couldn't even trace the source. When you can't trace the source of your data, it makes your story unauthentic. It makes your story doubtful. And one thing about data, according to our bosses, is that data does not lie. So you have to get your data from substantial sources and make sure every time you use someone else's data or someone else's words, because sometimes words can count as numbers. You make sure you quote them, or make sure you link them, make sure you let us know the source to help make it more authentic and more authentic. I think that would be the end of my presentation. Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, over to you, sir.
Thank you very, very much, Lucy. I love as you run down through, see people having their hands up already. I love as you run down through the 7 boxes that data fights use. I quickly want to ask first, do you think writing in that pattern restricts you as a journalist or as a researcher to ideate your story? What do you think about that?
All right. Sometimes we have that fear, especially even from the top, that this might restrict our writing. But we found out that every single one of us that writes in Data Fight, we use the 7 frame boxes, but our writing styles are different. The way we tell the story is different. The way we look at data is different. The way we want to report it is different. So it doesn't actually restrict your writing style. And we're not saying that this is like the core, this is what you should use every time you're writing the data story, but it's the basic. It will help you, streamline your frame of thought, because sometimes I know with data we can go big. I know I usually have that problem sometimes, that when I see a data set, I'm like looking at 1 million stories that this data set can tell. But with this 7-box framework, it helps you narrow down your thoughts and help you remove all the things that you don't even need in your story. So yeah, it doesn't actually restrict my creativity or our creativity in writing.
Okay. I think my final question will go down to sourcing. Are there challenges when you try to look for data and you don't find them, especially when you're trying to speak to issues and trying to find the cause and effect of it, right? And should I quickly just mention here that sometimes balancing your story from a data angle, balancing your data story from a cause and effect, and checking how it reflects down to your story helps you as a data journalist to conceptualize the idea of your reports, right? I can do that by throwing a quick example to everyone here and ask, okay, what is the cause of this particular issue that is going on in Nigeria? And if we put it down to data, you would almost discover that the assumptions that you have created, right, is not really tallying, right, when we relate it to data. But in your own case, Lucy, as sourcing ever been an issue, especially when you're trying to bounce it off with looking for data or trying to speak to a particular issue?
Yes, definitely. We've had issues with sourcing. I remember when I first started working, I remember first started in research analysis and first started working at DataFight. And I remember telling my boss, I said, "Sir, there's no data for this story." And he said, "Don't ever say there's no data. There's always data. Either you find it, if the data is not available, there's another data that is telling the story." So yes, sourcing for data can be quite an issue, especially just like the previous speakers have said, data is just becoming something interesting for Nigerians. Usually there is, we don't find any prior to this moment, data is something that can be excused in Nigeria. We don't make decisions based on data. We don't have any credible data source. But with this new saying that data is oil, and more people are now finding more interest in data, and data is actually becoming one of the most important things that companies and governments all around the world are using to make decisions. Data is now becoming something that is it's now becoming open. There's now more access to data in Nigeria. So sourcing has always been an issue. And sometimes if we don't find the direct data we need for our stories, there are other alternatives. There are other data that can tell the same story you want to tell. That's it.
Tosi Bamidili is raising up his hand. Can we
Hi, yes, thank
just
you.
get his own point from that?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
we can hear
can.
you. Please, you can go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Thank you. This is like very informative for me. I really appreciate especially this session, but generally everything. I had a specific question about just talking about sources. I have been I'm gonna use this as an example of a bit of the frustration that I'm facing at the moment. So I've been just like monitoring the Lekki deep sea port, for example, and trying to like see shipments, and it's kind of frustrating that I haven't been able to see um data that actually tracks shipments, tracks number of employees, tracks like budgets and things like that, and relate that to other, say, like seaports in developing countries. And so when you mentioned that, oh, when you can't see data, there's probably like other ways of getting data. I guess I was kind of stuck because my approach when I couldn't find data, and I really would like to hear from you if I've gone about it the wrong way. When I couldn't find data that gave me like accurate numbers on shipments and like just infrastructure relating to the Lekki deep sea port, I just like forecasted, but my forecast was from just websites that were reporting on the deep sea port, but I worry that that's not credible enough. And I was wondering how you will tackle something like that when you're trying to bring up numbers. The best that you would see, I guess, in terms of accurate numbers is like the World Bank comparing all the deep sea ports basically around the world. But it doesn't give specific numbers on day-to-day shipments, daily activities, just a breakdown of everything that happens. I don't know, what would you do in that scenario? And you can apply that to like just general, I guess. This is just an example.
All right, thank you so much, Tosin. We always have this issue when we're writing in data fight. Sometimes we look at issues and we're like, oh my God, there's no data, there's no collaborative data. But the one thing you never do with data, never do when you write the data stories is form your own numbers. You don't try to forecast your own numbers or try to make a guess of, okay, if this is 5 years, maybe it should be 10 now, because that actually already makes your story biased. And biases in writing, especially with numbers, is something that can get you in trouble. So that's the first thing. So the second thing is, if you can't find a story, if you can't find a recent data on shipments of Lekki deep sea shipment, one thing I'll advise is, if you said World Bank has a data, but not maybe the kind of data you want, there's a way you can tell a story with that data. Even if it's not recent, even if it's not, let's say, 2024, there's a way you can still tell a story with that data, but your report will be more authentic. That's one thing you're gunning for, because if you want to be, if you want to have a stay in this space, like a research analyst space, your reports, your numbers have to always be authentic. And from World Bank is a standard organization. They give better, more accurate data, and I think you should stick with that if that's all you can find. But maybe you can drop your contact with Mr. Kehinde, and maybe we can see how we can find other data sources that maybe can help you tell your story in a more accurate and in a more direct form as you want to tell it. I hope that helps, Mr. Tosin.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Wow, I'm just seeing that the form that we created is not accessible. The time is quite fast spent. Okay. So what we're going to do is, permit me, sorry, trying to do like multiple things at the same. Thank you very much, Lucy, for that very brilliant point. I know data has been and would always be a problem. Take it from me, who had probably worked a long years trying to research data. I vividly remember a particular time, right, where I was doing a story ad. I was at the verge of sending it to the editor when a senior colleague walked in, and just so I got off from the system to just like greet him. And while I was returning, he was like, what are you working on? And I just decided to tell you, well, this was what I'm working on. I'm about to send it. Like, oh, nice, makes sense. And he was like, did you get the data from this? And I was like, oh, I didn't get their data from this. I couldn't get it. And while he was standing there, he just sent me the data. And I was like, I've been using 3 weeks to look for what he just sent to me on the phone. Right. So sometimes it could be really tricky. Like I said, DataFile has a Dataplex platform that we built where you can request for some of these data. So if you want it or it's something related, you can always send a mail to us, and we would get that. We'll get that back to you, right? A lot of challenges really come up with climate-related data, energy-related data, mining-related data. Some of it in progression to 2025, we're looking to working with news organizations, NGOs, who are going to probably help in gathering some of this data. So if your organization is also interested, you can also write to us at DataFile, and we would look forward to working with you. But my time reiterates again that thank you all for joining this training, and we're about to call it a wrap for today. This training is going to continue again in January. And like I said, today we've been able to talk about business, climate, energy, and conflicts. By next session, we're going to be treating a whole lot of different sections of journalism, probably going to broadcast, touch AI tools, touch solution journalism. I can see someone, a renowned solution person in the group, touch solution journalism, touch investigative journalism, touch helps, touch fact checking, right? And see how you can drive some data. The reason for this is to see that how you tell your stories really can be influenced through data, right? And if you could just sit back and reflect on some of these ideas, maybe telling a story or telling research-driven stories might not be as complicated as you think it would be, right? We look forward to several participations that we're going to be doing. in and we're going to be engaging a lot of people in the coming year. But let me be quick to mention that at DataFi, right, we've created several solution AI technology tools that can help some of you to write, especially in analyzing some data, right? We're also going to be involved in a lot of training. So if you're interested in doing that, please follow us in every of our social media and do. I hope you really have gotten something very good today. I look forward to meeting with every one of us by next week. By next month and next year, we'll probably when we'll be pushing it out. So most likely we might be pushing up registration for that. So please follow us on every of our websites at datafight.com. If you check datafight.com, like I can see someone asking, you would see access to some of all these platforms that we'll be trying to see. Let me see if finally there are no questions for me to respond to. I don't think there's any question. Okay, someone said he was doing something about disability development, financing for disability welfare. Can you please direct me to a data source? I would also request that you send me a mail on this so that we can find that data for you, right? My email is kendi at datafight.com, kendi@datafight.com. So you can send me an email. Probably let me do that. Let me write that. Yeah, so that you can always copy it. Right? You can send me. Oh, sorry, I didn't send this to all. Give me a moment, please. So you can always send me an email, right, requesting for your data. Then we would try to see if we have it and also reply you for that. With that being said, thank you all for joining this training. I think we really appreciate your patience, and we look forward to seeing you in further trainings by January. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Bye.
Thank you.